A very good evening and a warm welcome to Personal Finance. I'm Kukuletu Cele. While we've set the scene for you in your 20s, 30s and 40s, now as you approach retirement, a sound investment strategy is a necessity. I'm joined in studio by Warren Ingram from Galileo Capital for a look at how to maximize your income, rethink your investments and spend smarter in your 60s. Warren, good to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
I take it the 60s is the interesting part because you've worked so hard over the last 40 plus years. Now it's almost time for you to enjoy the fruits of your labor, but there's several considerations to take into place before you actually decide to retire.
And I find for a lot of people it's the first time they really start to think of themselves as investors. Up until that point, they've saved their money into their retirement fund, they've kind of let it just take care of itself. They might have had a few other little savings on the side, but suddenly they realize that there's going to be a day where they have to live off their money that they've saved. And very often it's quite a frightening, intimidating experience for them. It's just life's happened before then, and now suddenly a stock market crash is not just an academic thing.
Exactly.
It's real. It could be really frightening.
Exactly. So if I am on the verge of turning 60 or even 65, I need to ask myself, what? Do I have enough? Am I prepared to continue working, especially given the fact that people are living longer these days? So
I think that's the critical point. I mean, in the past, the retirement age of 65 was not really a problem for us because our life expectancy would have been 68, 69. So you didn't need your money to last all that long. But now you could comfortably, there are lots of people living to 85. And so suddenly, to be an investor for 20, 30, potentially even 40 years, is a real issue to consider. And I think there, you're right. Your first question needs to be the capital that I have today, can it sustain my lifestyle costs once I'm no longer working? And I think for me, if you've got, let's say just for argument's sake, you've got a million rand. You need to know that you can only draw a maximum of 5% of that million rand to live off for the rest of your life. You need to let your capital still continue to grow. You have to worry about inflation. So if you're drawing more than 5% from your capital, you're probably going to get into difficulty if the stock market falls, inflation rises, etc. So doing that calculation you can do for yourself. You can say, well, these are the assets I have. What's 5%? That's what I can spend.
That's a lot of discipline, especially if you didn't have it over the last 40 years when you're actually preparing for retirement.
You're right, but unfortunately you don't have any choices now. I think if you are at that age, it has to go from being a concept and something that's going to happen to you one day to saying to yourself, this is my reality. This is something that I have to deal with and I have to face. And I think the issue there is that you might have some choices in terms of being able to continue working, whether you continue working full-time or part-time. You might decide, well, let me work at least part-time to subsidize my income. Even if you don't necessarily need the money desperately, you might just want to do it to give yourself peace of mind and to give yourself a bit of breathing room in your budgets.
So I need to review my financial plan, and first things first, do I have enough? As you mentioned, you look at certain other alternatives, but what about my investment strategy? Can I still go aggressively as I did back when I was in my 20s?
So it's a great question. I often meet people who are working for large employers, and the large employer will have a retirement fund, let's just say a provident fund, and they will almost prescribe or strongly suggest to those people who are 2 or 3 years from retirement that they move their money from, let's say, 65% in shares down to 50, down to 40, and eventually in the year that they are retiring to 100% in cash.
Sure.
Which to me is mindless. What you need to understand is, let's say you're 65 and you're going to retire. You've got 20 years to go, potentially maybe even 30, let's just say, of life to go. And that means you actually have a long-term horizon when you make your investment decisions. So sure, you can't invest as if you were 20 years old, but you should still have a really solid allocation to shares. At least, to me, at least 35% is the absolute minimum, preferably a higher amount. I would rather deal with between 50 and 65%, but if you're really panicky about the world and you can't tolerate losses, never less than 35. But 50 to 65 is an optimal ratio for you for all of your investment assets.
What about your view on individuals who make withdrawals on some of their retirement savings? Some people take that money out, they get a lump sum, want to redo their kitchen, pay off some of their debt. Is that an absolute no-no?
That is such a wealth destroyer. It's just, there's probably only one more surefire way to make sure that you're going to get into financial trouble, and that's going to take lots and lots of personal loans and that kind of thing, living on debt. So I think you should do everything you possibly can not to access your retirement funds until you physically retired and you need that money. One of the things we forget about is inside your retirement fund, there is no income tax, no dividends tax, no capital gains tax. So that is a tax-free investment inside the fund, growing. The only thing that's reducing that growth will be the costs. But for the rest, you've got this fantastic investment that SARS is giving you huge rebates on every time you make a contribution. You should be leaving that and letting it grow as much as you can. Rather go without the kitchen for a while.
Go without the kitchen for a while. We'll get back to that when it comes to downsizing, but maybe for those who do have debt at their 60s for some or other reason, is that the first thing that they need to tackle with whatever money they have available?
The only time it's acceptable to have debt in your 60s is if you're legitimately using it for growth purposes. In other words, you might be a business person and you've got a few distinct property investments, and there's some debt that you've got linked to those properties, but the properties are income generating and you get a tax benefit, something logical and rational like that. But if you've got debt on your own home, for example, and you just haven't really got round to paying off your bond, well, now is the time for the wake-up call. Please pay off your bond. Please get out of debt. Please don't have credit card debt. Be debt-free now.
Be debt-free. Something else that's also certain, if it's not coming when it comes to life, is death and taxes. And death also becomes quite a significant reality as you approach the later stages of your life. Is estate planning also somewhere where South Africans fall short?
Yeah, I think we don't like to think about it. When you're in your 20s, 30s and 40s, you're going to live forever and you don't know anybody that's died, or if you have, it's an accident or something like that. But when you're in your 60s, you've got friends who've passed away, and by then you should have realized that this is something you have to take seriously. So to me, one of the things that you would do as a matter of routine when you hit 60 is get your will checked, make sure that it's still current, and then every year or every 2 years thereafter, make sure that you review your will. And by the time you're 60 or 65, you can't really do too much from an estate planning point of view in terms of now saving lots and lots of estate duty or something like that. And I think very often we get tempted into weird investment schemes just because someone sold us a product to try and save estate duty. And usually what happens is you end up making a series of really bad decisions. So to me, your estate planning there is more about what actually happens to my money when I pass away, who's going to get it, practically have the decisions I've made in my will, can they be implemented, are we putting the right people, giving them the right access to money. And there, what's important to remember is your retirement fund is a fantastic estate planning tool because you pay no estate duty and no executives fees on money that you leave to your beneficiaries of your retirement fund. So that's something to consider. If you've got a big share portfolio or a big unit trust portfolio, rather use that money first while you are retired, and maybe draw less from your retirement fund because you can leave that to your beneficiaries, and you give them a great gift. You give them a heck of a pension to start life with.
Exactly. But what about certain life insurances that we have, your life policies, your life covers? Is that still necessary when you're in your 60s?
So now we're going to make the insurance agents grumpy. So I believe far too many people who are close to retirement or who are already retired are sold on the concept of maintaining your life assurance policy. You had it for the last 40 years. Why would you cancel it now? Well, in my view, that's a lifestyle cost that you're paying every single month. So you're taking money from your investments, you're putting it into a life policy, and sure, if you passed away, in the first year of your retirement, then there would be a nice lump sum that would get paid to your beneficiaries. But if you keep that life policy up for 20 or 30 years after you've retired, you've paid a lot of money away that probably you don't need. So to me, you look at your life policy and you say, if I've got a problem in my estate, in other words, if I'm going to force my spouse to sell the house to pay estate duties, then when I pass away, then clearly you still need life cover. But if there's no liquidity problem in your estate, then I would really strongly consider cancelling my life cover.
What about the fine print that's involved with that? Penalties, fees, and maybe anything that you might have to let go of?
So they're probably with the older policies, you might even actually get some money out. They might even have a surrender value in there. So that might be a positive, but I think nowadays with life policies, it's almost like your car insurance. If you cancel and you move somewhere else, or you just cancel, there shouldn't really be a penalty with just a life policy. The other one that people forget about is a disability policy. Now, once you've stopped earning a salary, you really can't justify maintaining a disability policy. You might find that the life company actually just says we're not going to pay out. So those would be one of the first things that I would consider cancelling if you're no longer going to work.
What about downsizing? It comes to your level of lifestyle. Maybe in your 40s and 50s, you were used to driving the big German car. Do I need to reconsider that now?
I think so. I mean, I think hopefully by the time you're in your 60s, you've realized you don't need to impress your friends and everybody else with your big fancy cars. You know, you like who you are and you're happy with it. So definitely. I mean, I think unless you really have a lot of money and you don't really need to manage your costs, downsizing is really not a bad idea. That doesn't mean you need to now live like a hermit, you know, in a little cave somewhere and spend no money. It just means to try and strike a balance. You know, to me, I would rather want to spend more money on traveling and on holidays when I'm retired than on driving a big fancy car that I don't really need anymore. And the same with houses. You know, when you're in your 40s and 50s, you buy the big house with lots of bedrooms because you know you need it for the kids, etc., etc.
Grandkids as well.
And okay, well, fair enough. You've got the grandkids, but once the kids are out of the house and hopefully the grandkids are living with the kids, then you don't need such a big house and you don't need to go through the effort of maintaining it and all of that. So living in a smaller but still nice house makes sense to me, and your costs really drop dramatically if you do that.
It's also out of interest. Relocation is also something that has been mentioned. So if I had the option of staying in Joburg or moving to Potch,
Move to Potch.
The better option?
You know why? There are lots of benefits that you get. So very often your property rates and taxes are lower in a smaller town because the properties are lower value. Things like insuring your car and insuring your house are much cheaper outside of the big cities. And then also just your day-to-day cost of living. You know, eating out in smaller towns is cheaper. You know, I mean, there's less requirement for massive security, etc., etc. So you really can cut your cost of living, but not your lifestyle.
Lifestyle, that's something so poignant that you mentioned, because you actually said you'd rather go on holiday than actually drive a big fancy car. Isn't that something that in your 60s you need to take into consideration, and in your years of retirement? Because you've worked so hard, you don't really want to turn into someone who's counting the pennies and living an uncomfortable life now.
So I mean that it's really fascinating behavior when you speak to people who have retired and they suddenly become afraid because they're no longer going to earn a salary, and so every cent that they spend they believe they'll never get back again, which in one way is true. I mean, if you're no longer earning a salary, you can't replace what you've lost. But at the same time, if you're investing sensibly, your capital is going to grow. So psychologically, you need to make the shift to say, I can spend money on holidays, and this is why I have worked so long and so hard. And before my health fails, or before I lose my sight, or something like that, which is one of the tragic examples, you know, now's the time to enjoy life. Obviously, responsibly. You know, obviously, don't now overspend.
Plan.
But plan and actually plan to spend money on your holidays. When I meet people who've retired, and I'll ask them, how much are you setting aside for holidays? And a year after they've retired, I'll ask them that question: have you spent it? Have you gone on holiday? Where's that budget? Where's the next holiday in the diary? Make it happen. And you find that your quality of life gets better by enjoying the things that you planned for all your life.
Well, it does seem as though prioritizing enjoying the fruits of your labor is important. Warren, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And that's it for Personal Finance this evening. Thank you to Warren Ingram from Galileo Capital. Now, do remember that we want to hear from you. So you can tweet any of your comments to @CNBC Africa using the hashtag Finance410, or to myself @Kukumfupi on Twitter. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.